it's very likely, I think, that the case will come back to the Supreme Court. Certainly they'll apply it to the European Court. So the whole saga goes on. Of course, one is disappointed, but I don't think there was, anyone had any real confidence that the way the law is so arcane and intricate that it would have come down to Assange's favour. One thing is true. We would not be standing here today doing this interview. We wouldn't be in that court. None of this would have happened had it been anyone but Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. There's no question about that. The behaviour of the Swedish authorities has been quite extraordinary. They've used the media, the prosecutor's office have used the media, the police have used the media, the whole presumption of innocence. This is a man who's been charged with absolutely nothing. The presumption of innocence has been thrown out. The original prosecutor in this case said that there was no case to answer, and it was only then continued when a politician, Klaus Borgström, in the middle of an election campaign in Sweden, decided he was going to represent the two women. And at a press conference, he was asked by a Swedish reporter, but both these women said the sex with Assange was consensual. And his answer was, but they're not lawyers. So from that point on, it has been really a wretched saga that should not be happening, that is totally unnecessary. The principles here go way beyond Julian Assange. It is about free speech. It is about the right of all of us to know what our governments say in private and the way they lie to us in public. The role of the United States in this has been made clear. We know that an indictment has been concocted in the US by a secret grand jury, when in fact somebody like Julian Assange, any whistleblower, should be protected by the United States Constitution. We know there is a sealed indictment. We know there have been discussions between the Swedish authorities and the US about the temporary surrender of Assange to Sweden. We don't know if any of this will happen, but there's just been too much about this case that has a very, very powerful political element that has really not a lot to do with whether someone is innocent or guilty of the allegations, such as they are, that have been thrown at Assange.
I wanted to ask you briefly about the media's role in this, especially amongst the British press. You see a real sense of a U-turn where people who were championing Julian as sort of a truth seeker have now turned on him and haven't even really reported the facts necessarily accurately.
Well, the media have played a very important role in this. First of all, they provided the platform in The Guardian and in Der Spiegel and the New York Times for the revelations, the original revelations of the warlords in Afghanistan and Iraq. Assange wanted to do it his way. He wanted to do it the WikiLeaks way. He didn't want to be a member of the club, and that was the problem. I think that I can't comment on the personal disagreements between himself and certain journalists, but I think some journalists, prominent journalists, have written and disgracefully about this case. Again, the presumption of innocence torn up, a kind of character assassination, personal, perfidious, vindictive. Why? My theory on this is that because what WikiLeaks has done over the last few years has actually shamed establishment journalism. It doesn't matter whether it's conservative or liberal or in the middle. I think it has shamed them. We all know, and I certainly know in my career, the best stories I've had have come from whistleblowers. but it means doing work. And I think the fact that journalists, too many journalists, have jumped on the wagon of simply attacking Assange because they don't like the way he parts his hair or whatever, have indicated to me a certain shame. WikiLeaks has shown up journalism, much of journalism, to have become a vehicle for governments and other vested authorities on face value. I mean, WikiLeaks produced in a matter of 2 years more revelations about the workings of democratic governments and the workings of the world, in many ways, how the world is run, than all the newspapers in the Western world put together. The word jealousy comes to my mind, but who knows?
Thank you very much,
John, how draining is it that this just keeps going on and on and on? Channel 9 Australia.
Oh, right. Okay. How draining?
Yeah, for a supporter.
Well, you know, it's important. It's not draining. It's important. It's a matter of principle that goes way beyond Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. It is about our right to know what our governments are up to. It's our right to know what the Gillard government is up to. It's our right to know the collusion between the Australian government and the US government on this particular case.
Do you think the Gillard government should be doing a bit more here?
Doing a bit more, I think they should stop doing what they're doing. And what we know from freedom of information searches in Australia is that the Gillard government has been colluding with Washington as Washington prepares prosecution of Julian Assange that has no basis. It's a concocted prosecution. And his own government, instead of protecting him, to which he has a right, have colluded with the US on that. That affects you, me, and every Australian. If this can happen in secret to somebody like Assange, it can happen to anyone.
So by that rationale, do you think he basically doesn't have a chance in this case?
No, I think he does have a chance. I think it goes on. I think we could be back here at the Supreme Court. It'll go to the European Court. If he goes to Sweden, the Swedish court system may prove to be independent. Who knows?
All right, thank you very much. Okay.
It's an extraordinary verdict because the justices were really scratching their heads and saying, look, it seems that the British Parliament was misled by the government in 2001 when this bill, this extradition bill, was put to them. But what Julian Assange's lawyers have said, wait on, we didn't know about the basis of this, we haven't a chance to consider it and challenge it, and that's why we could well be back at the Supreme Court. It's a very disconnected judgment. It makes the law, to me, seem rather shabby, actually, and I'm not talking about simply because they found against Assange. It is their arguments, which are not based on what MPs understood the law to be when they passed this extradition legislation in 2001. I think what WikiLeaks and Assange has made many journalists feel uncomfortable. Many journalists who report Westminster, Parliament, who report on face value, who don't investigate, who don't find out, who don't work hard at it. I think it's made many of those journalists feel very, very uncomfortable. And I think that has expressed itself in some of the quite extraordinary personal attacks, vindictive and perfidious attacks on Assange.
Do you really think there's some kind of conspiracy here?
I didn't say that. You should listen to what I just said.
Yeah. So why do you think these things
Well, if you know, I dare not use the word conspiracy because that's usually a pejorative word. But there have been, if you've read The Independent, who've done a very good job on this, they've reported there have been discussions between the Swedish authorities and the US authorities on the possible temporary surrender, as they call it, of Julian Assange to the United States. Yes. I mean, why has the Foreign Minister of Sweden and the Prime Minister of Sweden made public statements in a case and denied somebody a very basic right, a presumption of innocence? I don't know the answer to that. But I do know that there is a political atmosphere in Sweden that will test, and I repeat, test the independence of the Swedish courts.
Have you spoken to Mr. Assange? Do you know what he thinks about
Not
it?
today, he was stuck in traffic. Spoke to him yesterday, and he's in pretty good spirits considering.
What's going to happen now?
Well, it's all legal. We're into more of the legal saga. We could be back here at the Supreme Court. An application will be made to the European Court. I think it's very likely that the justices here will reconvene and consider the point made by Julian Assange's legal team that they've had no opportunity to consider the basis upon which this judgment has been made. And they rightly said this has to do with a fair trial, and the justices acknowledged that. So we could be back here, it could go on more. I don't know.
What do you think motivated the judges in their decision today?
I don't know what motivates judges, but I think that they were clearly, genuinely and judicially concerned about the way Parliament was misled by this. You know, you've got an arrest warrant that is a catch-all for anybody that has seen thousands of people transported to and from countries all over Europe that needs to be changed. The Parliament has said it wants to change it. The judges have looked at this and said that Parliament understood that this was going to be framed within English law, and that is a judicial authority is not a prosecutor, when in fact they meant a judicial authority can be a prosecutor under European law. It's a technical point, but it's a very important technical point because it is about whether this law stands or not.
So you don't think the judges were biased?
I don't know. Whether they were biased, I don't know. Are judges biased?
Do you think Mr. Assange can have a fair trial in Sweden if he goes there?
I don't know. I think this will test the independence of the Swedish judicial system as never before.
He's up against some pretty powerful forces, so how would you rate his chances of success? How would you rate his chances of success?
Well, you know, we've come this far. The fact that we've come to the highest court in the United Kingdom, in Britain, and all the way through the lower courts where it should have been thrown out, the High Court to here, is an utter condemnation of the way this case has been handled, particularly by the Swedish authorities and of course, in a much more sinister sense, by the US authorities. How it will turn out, I don't know, but it goes on.
How long can it take if it goes to the European Court?
He can't be extradited, I don't think, for at least another 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks.
But if he loses at the Supreme Court, if he loses his appeal at the Supreme Court, then goes.
Well, he
on
already
to
has
European
lost
Court.
it. It's whether or not they'll reconsider it, and if they reconsider it, then they might change their minds. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer.
That some might make that Mr. Assange should simply go back to Sweden, face these charges, prove himself innocent, if that's the case, and not fight it legally in this way.
Well, he's done that. He's done that. It's not a question of. I mean, he tried to be interviewed by the prosecutor. He got the prosecutor's permission to leave Sweden to come here when he was working with the Guardian. His lawyers said he's available for interview on the basis of European conventions which the Swedes and British have signed up to. He could have done interviews here, he could have done it at the embassy, he offered to do all these things. I think it's a very problematic situation for him in Sweden. He's being pursued by a prosecutor. In fact, his judgment today, I think the subtext of that makes clear Assange's argument all along, that he is being pursued by a prosecutor. This whole thing would not have got to this stage had a politician in the middle of an election campaign, Klaus Borgström, stepped in and after the initial prosecutor had thrown out the allegations against Assange, stepped in, and when this Borgström was asked at a press conference, hey, but wait on, these women have said that the sex with Assange was consensual, and his reply was, but they're not lawyers. And that's where this went downhill from that point. If it hadn't been Julian Assange and he hadn't been associated with WikiLeaks, we wouldn't be standing here today doing this interview.
And is that why he won't now just get on a plane?
Well, he will have to get on the plane. He hasn't fought it, I mean, in a way that it's come right through to the Supreme Court and may in fact go back to the Supreme Court and go to the European Court, should be a condemnation of the whole system in Sweden that has pursued Assange, prosecutor using the media quite ruthlessly to pursue the case in Sweden, that the whole prospect of a fair hearing in Sweden is highly dubious. It may well happen. The court system in Sweden may well work. I don't know.
John, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Okay, you're
Thanks
welcome.
to me.